Imagine for a moment that you are a guardsman entrenched in the mud of a dying world. The artillery is screaming overhead, the enemy is closing in, and hope has abandoned you. Then the ground begins to tremble. It is a rhythmic, tectonic shaking that rattles your teeth. You look up, and through the smoke, you see it. A towering colossus of ceramite and adamantium, 30 feet tall, draped in the heraldry of ancient kings. It steps over your trench, its thermal cannon turning night into day, incinerating the horrors that hunted you. To you, the lowly soldier, this is salvation. This is an Imperial Knight. It is the physical manifestation of the Omnissiah's wrath and the Emperor's protection. You see a god engine, a pinnacle of chivalry and honor, moving with a grace that defies its massive tonnage. You imagine the pilot inside as a lord of the stars, a noble hero sitting in a pristine cockpit, commanding this beast with the push of a button and the pull of a lever. You see the glory, you see the power, you see the lie. Now let us strip away the armor. Let us tear open the adamantium shell and look inside the throne. The reality of the pilot, the noble scion, is not one of clean controls and tactical displays. The air inside the cockpit is thick, recycling the smell of ozone, ancient incense, and the copper tang of old blood. It is hot, suffocatingly so, like the inside of a kiln. The pilot is not sitting comfortably. They are shackled. Thick cables, coated in sacred unguents, snake from the machinery and bury themselves deep into the sockets drilled into their skull and spine. They are not driving the night. They are being consumed by it. The sweat pouring down their face is not from the heat of battle, but from the sheer agonizing mental exertion of keeping their own soul from drowning. Every step the machine takes, the pilot feels in their own phantom limbs. Every impact on the ion shield feels like a hammer blow to their own skin. When the thermal cannon fires, they feel the burning heat in their own blood. This is not a vehicle. It is an Iron Maiden that demands a piece of your sanity in exchange for its power. To understand the horror of the Imperial Knight, you must first discard the idea of the pilot. In the grim darkness of the far future, humanity does not master technology, it submits to it. The relationship between a noble and their knight suit is not symbiotic, it is parasitic. The machine is ancient, often thousands of years old, and it has a hunger. It demands a mind to process its fury, and the cost of that connection is something far more terrifying than death. It is the slow, grinding erosion of the self, until the line between the flesh and the steel ceases to exist entirely.
To understand why anyone would willingly subject themselves to this torture, we must look at the twisted society that produces them. The night houses, the Questoris familia, are often romanticized as bastions of old-world honor. They paint themselves with the aesthetics of medieval chivalry, coats of arms, oaths of fealty, courtly manners, and high-sounding titles. It looks like a noble preservation of human dignity amidst the galaxy's barbarism. But this feudal structure is not a choice. It is a breeding program designed to feed the machines. If you are born into a night house, your destiny is written before you draw your first breath. You are not a child. You are a potential component. From the moment you can walk, you are tested, not just for physical strength or tactical acumen, but for mental compatibility. The tech priests of the Sacristan Order scan your neural pathways, looking for the specific genetic markers that allow for interface with the throne Mechanicum. If you lack them, You are cast aside, failed stock, relegated to servitude, or forgotten. But if you possess the markers, your life becomes a rigorous tunnel of indoctrination. You are taught that the greatest honor in existence is to bond with a knight. You are raised on stories of your ancestors who walked as giants. They do not tell you about the nosebleeds that never stop. They do not tell you about the nightmares that aren't yours. They sell you the lie of the noble pilot to ensure you walk willingly into the suppression chair. It is a necessary deception, for if the aspirants knew the true price of the throne, the houses would collapse overnight. This system creates a horrifying paradox. The scions are trained to be arrogant, proud, and fiercely individualistic, traits we associate with nobility. Yet the ultimate goal of their existence is to plug themselves into a collective consciousness that strips away individuality. They are bred to be kings so they can become slaves. The entire culture of the night worlds, with all its pomp and ceremony, is an elaborate mechanism to produce a steady supply of fresh, strong minds for the hungry god engines to consume. Consider the pressure of lineage. In the Imperium, you are nothing without your history. For a knight scion, the pressure is crushing. You are told that the suit waiting for you contains the wisdom of 20 generations of your family. Failing to bond with it isn't just a personal failure. It is a betrayal of every ancestor who ever lived. You are carrying the weight of 1,000 years of war on your shoulders before you even sit in the chair. This psychological burden is the first shackle, ensuring that when the time comes, you will not run. You will sit down, let them drill the plugs into your skull, and you will thank them for the privilege.
Now we arrive at the instrument of the torment, the throne Mechanicum. To the uninitiated, it looks like a command seat, perhaps an ornate Gothic chair situated in the heart of the cockpit. But in the eyes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, it is a holy altar. Technically speaking, it is a marvel of Dark Age technology, a direct neural interface that bypasses the clumsy limitations of hands and eyes. There are no steering wheels, no pedals, no joysticks that control the movement of the limbs. The throne connects the machine's cogitators directly to the pilot's cerebral cortex and central nervous system. When the connection is made, a process known as the rites of awakening, the sensation is described as a violent intrusion. It is not a gentle handshake between computers. It is a spear of ice driven into the mind. The pilot's sensory input is overridden. Your eyes see what the knight's auspex sensors see. Your ears hear the battlefield through audio receptors. Your sense of balance is recalibrated to the center of gravity of a 40-ton walker. For all intents and purposes, your biological body ceases to matter. You are the knight. But the throne Mechanicum does more than just transmit motor commands. It is a storage device. This is the secret that turns the technology into a horror story. The throne uses a psycho-reactive material that imprints the neural patterns of its occupant. When a pilot spends decades bonded to a knight, fighting, killing, and eventually dying, their consciousness leaves a stain, a ghost of their personality, their memories, and their combat instincts is saved into the throne's cogitator banks. We call these the echoes. Think about the implication of this. When you plug into a knight that has served your house for 3,000 years, you are not stepping into an empty vehicle. You are stepping into a crowded room, a room filled with the screaming, warring, demanding ghosts of every single person who sat in that chair before you. The throne Mechanicum is not just a control interface, it is a graveyard of souls. And the moment the plugs click home, those ghosts wake up. They do not welcome you.
they evaluate you. This is the symbiosis the tech priests speak of with religious reverence. They claim the machine spirit guides the pilot. In reality, it is a constant, deafening mental assault. The throne floods your mind with emotions that are not yours. You feel a sudden overwhelming rage at an enemy you have never met because your great-grandfather hated them. You feel a paralyzing fear of plasma fire because the pilot 3 generations ago burned to death in this very seat. You are forced to process the trauma of 20 lifetimes simultaneously, all while trying to keep your own identity from being washed away in the flood. Once the neural jacks are locked in, silence becomes a memory. You might think that being inside a war machine, amidst the roar of battle, is the loudest place in the galaxy. But the true cacophony is inside your skull. This is the reality of the echoes. The throne Mechanicum does not just store data, it preserves the dominant emotional states and personality quirks of every previous pilot. And they are not dormant. They are awake, and they are watching you. Imagine trying to think clearly, trying to formulate a tactical decision while a dozen voices scream at you from the back of your mind. These are not hallucinations. They are the psychic imprints of your ancestors. You hear the gruff command of your grandfather, demanding you charge the enemy line. You feel the cold, calculating detachment of a great aunt who favored long-range bombardment. You feel the panic of a distant cousin who died screaming in this very seat 3 centuries ago. They are all there, overlapping, arguing, and judging your every move. This creates a terrifying hierarchy within your own head. The stronger the will of the ancestor, the louder their echo. If a legendary High King piloted your suit for 60 years, his voice will be a thunderclap in your mind, drowning out your own thoughts. You are constantly fighting for control of your own limbs. You might want to retreat to a better firing position, but the echoes scream cowardice and flood your body with shame so intense it feels like physical nausea. You might want to spare a fleeing enemy, but the echoes demand blood, their collective rage overriding your mercy. The code of chivalry that the Knight houses adhere to is not just a set of written rules, it is a mental compulsion. The echoes enforce it. They condition you. Over time, you stop fighting them. It becomes easier to just let the voices guide you, to surrender your autonomy to the collective. This is the insidious horror of the throne. It kills your individuality by dilution. You are no longer one person. You are a vessel for a committee of the dead. You are never, ever alone. Even in your sleep, the phantom whispers bleeding into your dreams. Now, before we witness the dark ritual that binds a soul to this nightmare, consider the cost of knowledge. We delve into the deepest, most harrowing archives of the 41st millennium to decode the truth behind the glory. If you want to survive the grim darkness of the far future with your mind intact, you need a guide. Subscribe to Silent Imperium and ring the bell. Do not let the truth be lost to the void. Now, let us return to the Chamber of Echoes.
The horror of this existence begins long before the first battle. It begins with the ritual of becoming. This is the rite of passage that every aspiring noble must endure to claim their birthright. To the public, it is a ceremony of pomp and grandeur. In reality, it is a night of torture designed to cull the weak. The aspirant, often no older than a teenager, is taken to the sanctuary of the knights. The tech priests, the sacristans, prepare the throne Mechanicum, anointing the sockets with sacred oils and burning incense to appease the machine spirit. The young noble is strapped into the seat. There is no armor, no protection, just a fragile human body and a machine that has seen 10,000 years of slaughter. The sacristans connect the neural plugs, intone the final prayers to the Omnisia, and then they leave. They seal the hatch. The aspirant is left alone in the dark, locked in a metal coffin with the ghosts of their ancestors. The power is cycled on. The interface engages. What happens next is known as the interaction. The mind of the aspirant is laid bare before the throne. The echoes do not hold back. They assault the newcomer's psyche with the force of a tidal wave. They probe every weakness, every fear, every insecurity. It is a mental interrogation that lasts for an entire night. The aspirant must mentally wrestle with these ghosts, asserting their dominance, proving that their will is strong enough to command the respect of the dead. Many do not survive the night. When the sacristans open the hatch in the morning, they often find the aspirant dead, brain dead, their neural pathways burned out by the sheer psychic overload. The stress of the connection causes aneurysms, strokes, or cardiac arrest. The throne simply rejected them, extinguishing their life like a candle in a hurricane. These are the failed. Their names are stricken from the records, their bodies disposed of quietly. The house cannot afford to show weakness. Others survive physically, but their minds are shattered. They are pulled from the cockpit gibbering, drooling, their eyes wide with a terror that will never fade. They have seen the abyss, and the abyss has eaten them. These unfortunates are often lobotomized and turned into servitors, or locked away in the deepest dungeons of the family keep, living reminders of the price of failure. Only those who emerge with their sanity intact, hardened, cold, and changed are deemed worthy. They have not just survived a test, they have been accepted by the parasite. They are now knights.
If you survive the ritual, you might think the worst is over. You would be wrong. The ritual is just the handshake. The marriage is a slow death. As a knight pilot serves year after year, the erosion of self begins. It is subtle at first. You might find yourself using phrases your grandfather used, even though you never met him. You might develop a taste for foods you previously hated, or a hatred for colors you once liked. The boundary between you and them begins to blur. The Adeptus Mechanicus calls this communing with the machine spirit, but a more accurate term would be overwrite. The throne Mechanicum is a rigid structure. The human mind is plastic. In the battle between the two, the machine always wins. The personality of the pilot is slowly filed down to fit the mold of the throne. This is why older knights often seem distant, cold, and inhumanly stoic. They are not repressing their emotions, they simply have fewer of their own emotions left to feel. This erosion is accelerated by the class of knight you pilot. The machine influences the mind. A pilot bonded to a knight gallant, a close-quarters brawler, will find themselves becoming increasingly aggressive, impatient, and bloodthirsty in their daily life. The machine's hunger for melee combat bleeds into their social interactions. Conversely, a pilot of a knight castellan, a heavy fire support platform, becomes paranoid, obsessed with defensive perimeters, and unable to trust anyone within arm's reach. The tool shapes the user until the user becomes the tool. The tragedy is that the pilots believe they are in control. They believe their honor and their nobility are their own. But are they? Or are they simply acting out a script written by 1,000 dead men? When a knight charges into battle, shouting oaths of vengeance, is it the young pilot speaking, or is it the ancient echo of a pilot from the Horus heresy, reliving a grudge from 10 millennia ago?
The pilot becomes a passenger in their own body, a biological component that keeps the reactor running and the aim true, while the collective ghosts of the throne steer the destiny of the house. We also must speak of the physical toll. The symbiosis demands energy. Pilots often suffer from chronic fatigue, malnutrition, and neural degeneration. The sheer caloric burn of processing the data from the throne leaves them gaunt and hollow-eyed. They age prematurely. A noble in their 40s may look like a withered husk of 80. They give their youth, their vitality, and their very life force to the machine, and the machine takes it all, indifferent to the suffering of the meat that pilots it.
Is there an escape? Is there a way to break the chains of the throne Mechanicum without losing your life? The Imperium tells stories of freeblades, knights who have cast off the heraldry of their houses to wander the stars as solitary heroes. They are painted as tragic figures, seeking redemption or fighting for a personal code of honor that transcends politics. But this too is a distortion of the truth. To become a freeblade is not liberation, it is exile. When a knight leaves their house, they are cut off from the support network that keeps the machine and the pilot functional. There are no sacristans to soothe the machine spirit. There are no rituals to calm the echoes. A freeblade is alone in the cockpit, fighting a constant, losing battle against the mental degradation of the throne. The voices in their head do not stop. They get louder, unchecked by the discipline of the house. The heroic wanderer is often a madman, driven by the screaming ghosts of his ancestors to seek death in battle, just to make the voices stop. And then there is the darker path, the path of the traitor. What happens when the pilot breaks but refuses to die? What happens when they open their mind not to the ghosts of the past, but to the whispers of the warp? The Chaos Knights. Here, the horror of the throne Mechanicum is taken to its ultimate, grotesque conclusion. In a Chaos Knight, the pilot does not struggle against the machine, they fuse with it. The idolater throne does not just store the soul, it consumes the flesh. The pilot is no longer a human sitting in a chair. They are a mass of fused meat and circuitry, their nervous system woven directly into the corrupted cogitators. They achieve the ultimate symbiosis, but at the cost of their very soul. They are no longer slaves to tradition. They are slaves to eternal hunger. It serves as a grim reminder. In the 41st millennium, there is no freedom. There is only a choice of which master you will serve. The crushing weight of the corpse god's tradition, or the maddening laughter of dark gods. But for the loyalist noble, for the dutiful scion who endures the ritual, the echoes, and the erosion of self, there is only one end. It is not retirement. There are no old knight pilots tending to gardens on paradise worlds. A knight pilot serves until they die. And it is in the moment of death that the final, most terrifying secret of the Imperial Knight is revealed. Imagine the final battle. The ion shields have failed. The armor is breached. The cockpit is engulfed in flames. The pilot, old and broken, feels the life draining from their body. As the darkness closes in, they might expect peace. They might expect the embrace of the Emperor, or simply the silence of the void. They will find neither. In that final millisecond, as the brain synapses fire their last spark, the throne Mechanicum activates its primary function one last time. It does not just record the battle data, it initiates a soul transfer. The intense psychic connection, forged over decades of symbiosis, acts as a vacuum. The consciousness of the pilot, their memories, their personality, their trauma, their very soul is ripped from the dying flesh and uploaded into the psycho-reactive crystal matrix of the throne. You do not die. You are archived. This is the final union. The pilot becomes one of the echoes. They join the chorus of the dead that they have heard whispering in their head for their entire life. They become the ghost that will haunt the next generation. It is a form of immortality, yes, but it is a cursed one. You are trapped in a purgatory of circuitry, reliving the glory and the horror of war for eternity, unable to move, unable to speak, only able to scream your instincts into the mind of your grandchild. This is the true cost of the Imperial Knight. It is not just the service of a lifetime, it is the enslavement of an afterlife. The Imperial Knight houses are not just families, they are necropolises. Every knight suit is a mobile tomb, carrying the active, suffering souls of its lineage. The pilot you see marching to war is not one man or woman. They are the tip of a spear made of trapped ghosts, driven by a technology that refuses to let the dead rest.
So, when you see the towering form of an Imperial Knight striding across the battlefield, banners snapping in the wind, heralded by the roar of trumpets, do not envy the pilot. Do not look at their shining armor and see a god. Look closer. See the machine for what it truly is, a gilded cage. The Imperium is built on sacrifice. We know the daily sacrifice of the Psyker to the Golden Throne. We know of the short, brutal lives of the guardsmen. But the tragedy of the night pilot is a different kind of horror. It is a horror of privilege. It is a horror wrapped in silk and steel. They are the masters of the battlefield, yet they are the ultimate slaves. They possess the power to level cities, yet they cannot even claim ownership of their own thoughts. They are bred for the chair. They are tortured by the ritual. They are hollowed out by the symbiosis. And in the end, they are consumed by the legacy they sought to uphold. The throne Mechanicum promises power, but the currency it demands is your humanity. And the debt is never, ever paid. The next time you wish for the power of a god engine, remember the price. Remember the voices in the dark, and remember that in the grim darkness of the far future, even death offers no escape from duty. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the psychological horror of Warhammer 40K, consider subscribing to Silent Imperium. We decipher the lore that others fear to touch. What other machines of the Imperium hide dark secrets? The Titan Legions? The Dreadnoughts? Tell us in the comments below what nightmare we should decode next. Until then, the Emperor protects, but the throne remembers.